Welcome, everyone. I'm Jamie Flinchball, host of People Solve Problems, and today we have a special guest with us, Dr. Shannon Flumerfelt. Shannon, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jamie. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Little background about Professor. You're the Endowed Professor of Lean at Oakland University. You're also the founder of the Charactership Lean Consulting, which is a really creative name. I don't think we hear often. Um, a creative systems thinker for lean applications, a strong advocate for lean leadership, and our histories have passed through Oakland universities long ago. My one of my co-founders, with along with Andy Carlino, was Dennis Pauly, who is a graduate of Oakland University and a very strong supporter, both financially and otherwise. And he founded the Pauly Lean Institute. Um, you help carry that charter forward. I was chair of the board of advisors for many years, and when I left the state, I passed that baton on to someone else. But we certainly have crossed paths. I'll say back in my days there in Michigan.
That's right. That's right.
Both in the classroom and in your consulting work, you work with, leaders and help build leaders and all of that. You do a lot of sort of coaching and engagement. So I'd like to kind of start with, the hard stuff. Can you talk about maybe a situation where you were in a coaching role, helping people on their challenges, their problems, whatever that might be, but it was really a difficult situation for whatever reason, and how do you handle those difficult moments or this difficult moment?
Yes, and I think this is a question that plagues leaders and managers and teams for sure, and groups, and even in interpersonal relationships, right? When you have difficult situations or difficult people to deal with, how do you handle that? And one of the things that I like to do is try to really get a good understanding. And this is all just basic Lean 101 is, try to talk to the critical stakeholders involved, understanding the viewpoints and the best scenario, the easiest scenario, I should say, to solve with a difficult situation or difficult person. If there's something that is not an interpersonal behavioral uh, team group dynamic, personality conflict type of thing. If it's something external, like I don't really like I'm not really good at or don't know how to do the tasks that I'm assigned. That's easy. You can go and coach that person, give them training and mentoring. That's an easy one to figure out. So really kind of separating what are we talking about here, and even creating like a mini Ishikawa for that situation where you can kind of see what are all of the conditions here that are existing. Because no matter what, we have to acknowledge that whenever you have an organization or a group of people, you're going to have complexity. And we cannot get away from complexity. I think a lot of times we think, well, if we just simplify things, and we need to do that to be respectful and communicate well, but there's always complexity and emergence happening, and especially with people, on the social sciences side of things. So separating and trying to figure out, is it something, external that's easy, that we can create a countermeasure, a solution for? Let's do that. But starting with that respect for people, talking and listening to the critical stakeholders, being able to put that in the context, culture, and climate. Sometimes people are expecting something that just isn't possible. If you're in a small business and your business is just emerging or kind of on the edge, trying to get over break even, for instance, someone is not going to come in and get like a $5 an hour salary raise every 6 months, necessarily. So people sometimes don't understand that. But I think also From the internal side, there's a couple of things to look at. I would, try to understand, is there a lack of knowledge that this person has, right? Is it a knowledge gap? Maybe they don't know how business works. Maybe they think, hey, it's okay if I'm 10 minutes late. And a customer standing outside the door and the door's not unlocked, I say, oh, it's no big deal. It's just 10 minutes. But, that customer is here for an appointment on schedule. So, sometimes they just don't equate like what is the business side of all of this. And so I think the knowledge and, also making sure that they understand, if this happens in a group or team, here's what we have. We have an HR manual, or we have a policy and procedure, or if we don't, we need to get one. And there's always a chance for improvement there. So knowledge is one area. The second thing that I think is what I call dispositions, and this is, the attitude, right? The attitude about that job, or that particular task or initiative or that challenge that's in front of somebody. So, you may have varying degrees of intensity or pace or expectations on how that's all going to unfold. And so that disposition is important. What does that person really believe is possible for them to accomplish? And, what impact does that have? Are they understanding? Do they have that, heart for it? So that's another issue. And there's things that you can do to help people, coach them through that to understand and to get to a healthier place. And then I think the third thing is, what can they actually do? So, I was just talking with one of my colleagues yesterday about this, about how flawed our interviewing processes are, that we think that we can take a piece of paper and a 1 hour conversation or a series of interviews of conversation and really understand, what can that person do? What do they actually know how to do today? And so we hire people and they may present well and so on, and maybe they just really don't know what to do or how to do it. They don't have the skill set. So it's sort of the knowledge, the head, the dispositions, the heart, the application, the hands. So kind of, that first separation of internal, external stuff. If you're internal, let's look at the person holistically, head, heart, and hands, and see if we can figure out what needs to be done. But there's always a solution to these things, and it can seem very overwhelming because people get, there's emotion tied to it. And, either you like a person or maybe you don't care for them or whatever that might be, all of that, that's all the complexity, and it can kind of cloud things up. So I think it's just important to, sit down, have a strategy, have a little bit of a framework. This one might work for you, and try to see if you can get the ball moving in the right direction. And then you can reinforce and recognize and reward people from there when it starts to happen.
Yeah, great. Well, I love the idea of an Ishikawa diagram breaking this down, right? It's really when a problem's complex, breaking it down is one of the key elements that we have to do. So sort of a two-part question. The first part on the Ishikawa is, do you actually draw it? Like, do you actually draw out an Ishikawa diagram, or is it more just sort of a background? This is how I organize the thinking. And then the second part of that is, what's your mechanism to make all those assessments, right? Assess attitude or assess knowledge. Is it perception of the stakeholders? Is it testing? Is it just interviewing? How do you sort of, I'll say, validate some of the assumptions as you break the problem down from an Ishikawa mindset?
Yeah, so really your second part of the question, the mechanism should inform the Ishikawa. So let's just assume your mechanism is valid and reliable, and you have, you're able to turn, data into facts, so you're making a fact-informed decision. But the actual Ishikawa itself, I find it very helpful to actually draw it out. And if you can draw it out with the person or with the team that's experiencing a difficulty, that is the best, because sometimes when you actually see it, it's great, but it should be a co-creation ideally. of, the client and the consultant, and trying to see what that actually looks like. I like to draw it out, and I've done that many, many times. As you mentioned, at Oakland University, I have a graduate program in lean leadership, and we do a lot of this development of competencies around lean leadership. And they're drawing out Ishikawa's for themselves. They're recognizing, maybe, why aren't I a good communicator? Why, what do I need to do for my critical thinking? How can I be a better change leader? And oftentimes we will use an Ishikawa, and they'll go through and reflect on it themselves. And so that becomes really the most powerful, when you can self-correct and take that on. So that is the power of the Ishikawa. Sometimes, it may be a little bit of overkill, to draw it out. And as long as you can conceptualize it, that can also help. But I would say I'd prefer to write it down, because it starts to get very concrete. And it takes it also, as we mentioned before, kind of away from this like emotional drama, that's going on. And you're actually looking at it in a much more logical, analytical way, still respecting the way people feel and their disposition about it. But it can kind of help to make it more clear.
Yeah. Oh, I really love that. And, sort of, if we assume that when it comes to self-analysis, if, writing in a journal is better than just, sitting and thinking about yourself, then writing out in a structured way is better than just writing in a journal. So that idea of giving that core structure to sort of break it down is fantastic to hear how you do that, and that you're doing it in the graduate level classes. That's pretty neat. So once you have an Ishikawa and you have a whole bunch of contributing causes to your problem or to your gap, that you're trying to close, picking what to work on is a challenge. So how do you prioritize what to work on? Sometimes it's, well, let's work on the easiest thing because we can make progress, or, well, let's work on the biggest thing because that's where progress is going to be. So how do you go about that prioritization process when you have all these things that fundamentally could contribute to the gap you're trying to close?
Yeah, so and part of this kind of goes back to your second question on the Ishikawa about the mechanism and where the data comes from. So how deep and rich and reliable are your data? And again, interviews, surveys, Gemba walks, data analysis of of the business or of the team performance or of the person's performance, all of that, all those things, are sources or mechanisms for trying to get to a solution. And then, the idea of those contributing causes, it can be a little bit overwhelming. And so the question then, where do we begin? Where do we start? Well, it really depends, I think, on the context, as everything in lean does. We're not prescriptive in lean. We're very organic in the work that we do as, lean managers and leaders and coaches, right? It's very organic. You have to be there at Gemba kind of in the moment to really make it all work. But with that being said, there are several ways that you can take a look at those contributing causes and figure out where to start. I think, first of all, if there is a good strategic plan and management through Hoshin Conry and looking at True North, for sure, you want to align all of that right there so that the strategic vision and intention of the organization, you're realizing that in daily work. So strategic alignment is big. I think the next thing that you can do, if you start to get more down onto like a daily tactical level, probably the next level down is, I would take a look at something like your quality function deployment analysis, which is really showing you what your customers want and technically what you're delivering and how well you're delivering it. So it's a kind of a Kaizen event, really, with the contributing causes, to see which one is really, how do we hit that quality function deployment, what the requirements are emerging there, where we need to work the most. And of course, you can do a Pareto approach, like you were saying, where you take the biggest cause and the most significant one, and you attack that, and then that will have the most synergy for solving causes underneath that. But sometimes that's too big. And, sometimes you have to say, well, I can't pull all the levers to make all this happen. And so you have to say, what can I do within the scope of where I'm at? How much power, influence, responsibility, authority do I have in the organization? What can I do? So you have to kind of tone that down. One thing, too, that I think is interesting is if you take a look at an interrelationship diagram and you're measuring, the inputs, outputs, and impacts of this one thing on all the other key areas of the organization, you can say, wow, well, this one I can see I have, 15 connections here between this cause and something important, or this cause and another cause. That's like a really highly correlated issue, then that'll give you a big high impact.
Mhm.
So really, any of those tools, again, I think like you said before, I loved it, where you say, do you journal? Do you think about it? Do you journal, or do you actually visualize it? And so it's just kind of this urging to kind of move towards the visual management piece of lean and all of these things that have to do with people.
Yeah, so in that people thread, a lot of what you've talked about so far is taking the messy and providing some structured thinking tools to help organize it, increase our analytical thinking around the messiness, et cetera. Along with that, leveraging people, how do you also, integrate or tap into people's intuition in the process, whether there's a single moment or just throughout the entire way of engagement?
Yeah, and so I think that's really important because oftentimes I think, with lean coming much more from an engineering perspective, it's more of the black and white and the tools, right? But there's this whole framework that drives all of this. It's the tenets and the thinking of lean that actually make it work. So to choose tools is not really lean. You have to have this whole package. It's um, a whole big toolbox approach to it. And so with leveraging people and understanding, their strengths and weaknesses. I mean, there's inventories, that you can take. Myers-Briggs is the most researched and most like trusted one, but there's others, you can understand people's strengths and weaknesses, whether or not they are intuitive or more logical, things like that. And that helps if you're doing a nice team building exercise or working with someone one-on-one as a coach. That can help. But I think also that there needs to be this recognition that culture is very oblique. I mean, you know what it looks like, but you don't always know how it works. Behind the scene, it's kind of like you can tell if you did a good job on something. Maybe you don't really comprehend all the dynamics and support and pressure, whatever you had behind to have that job happen and turn out well. So really understanding with leveraging people is to be able to help them to recognize, hey, if you are more intuitive, that's great. That is a strength, and we need to recognize that. Michael Porter has one of the best explanations and definitions of social capital, where he calls it the competitive advantage. So if you think about it and you say, you're not leveraging people in your organization, that is your competitive advantage right there. You don't need to necessarily go buy a new technology or equipment or have some beautiful building or whatever. It's that competitive advantage is in your social capital. And so dealing with that, with the strengths that people bring to the job is super important. And it's good to understand that through observing and working with people, talking to them, using inventories if you want to go that formal with it. And it can be incredible. I mean, the way I think about it is this, like we know that we totally underutilize our brains as individual people. Our brain is not utilized. We have a large percentage of it that is not being used. That translates when you put all of these underused brains into a group or a team or an organization. now you have this organization with all these underutilized brains. And so we think about how can we unlock even just a percentage of that. It's the same thinking we do with lean about waste, right? How much of what we do is waste versus value add. And so really understanding that every person in front of us here has this potential that's totally untapped. From ourselves to every person we know and work with, there is so much there that could be done that we have to work against that, right? We have to try to unfold that, get that open and see what's there. So that's the way I look at it. And it's fun because people do enjoy that. And I think it's important that we individualize and customize, for people in this regard. We're not robots, we're individual people and we have strengths and weaknesses. We have to respect that and, try to get to that idea, thinking optimistically about what is possible.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I appreciate you sharing your perspective and your approach, your thought process. And for those that want to experience more from you, they can, engage with you as a consultant, or, and I think this is really cool, go get a degree in lean leadership, a graduate degree in lean leadership from Oakland University, and engage with you that way, which is a pretty rare opportunity out there in the graduate education world.
Thank you, Jamie. Thanks so much for having me on. And yeah, for sure, if anybody's interested, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be glad to help you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, and thank you to all our listeners. And we'll be back next time.